Yes, thank you.
Mr. Constant,
Here.
Mr. Rivera,
Present.
Mr. Myers.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. We have a packed agenda as always, so we will move right through. We're going to start with AWU water treatment and turn it over to Mr. Persinger.
Thank you. David Persinger, Assistant General Manager, AWW. There's two topics I wanted to brief you on today. One is community water fluoridation, and the second topic is the program management office contract, update on that and requested assembly action. So community water fluoridation, it's been in place for many years. In fact, I went back and looked in the history of Anchorage, and actually in the early 1950s is when Anchorage instituted fluoride. And believe it or not, there was controversy at the city council in the 50s over whether Anchorage should start fluoridating water or not. This is it's a public health issue. It's really driven by largely by the dental folks, the dental associations, as well as United States Public Health Service and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And so essentially, we're the conduit. AWW, fluoridates water because it's required by code. We really don't have an official opinion on it because it's a public health thing. It's something we do. It's required by code. But as far as Safe Drinking Water Act, EPA compliance requirement, it's not required. It's generally done as a local, either a state or a local city type. Here's the actual code section. I'm not going to read through it, but essentially, the 26.40050 requires us to add fluoride. And one of the key parts on this code provision was put in place quite a while ago, and you'll notice that not to exceed more than 1.3 parts per million. Well, back in 2015, there was analysis done by the CDC and the Public Health Service, and they looked into the optimum levels of fluoridation, and they determined that 1.3 was too much, and so they've coalesced on this 0.7 parts per million, and that's what AWW follows in our water system. Now getting to this recent court ruling, I think there was an email that went to, all of the assembly members. There was a recent Northern District court in California that has taken on this community water fluoridation issue. There's a group of plaintiffs that essentially have come together. What they're trying to do is force the EPA to reevaluate community water fluoridation and look at the levels. And there's a ton of folks out there that have opinions on fluoride. It's a very controversial issue. I think you saw a couple years ago when fluoride was turned off at a Cluton, it was kind of a big deal, Fluoride Gate. There was a lot of folks that supported fluoride at that time that actually came out and were concerned that it had been turned off. Generally, we see the folks that are against fluoride, they're the ones that usually come out and try to make changes or try to influence decisions. But from a regulatory standpoint, we're regulated by the United States Environmental Protection Agency through the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. So far, there has been no changes on the regulatory levels from EPA or DEC. And our member associations, we're member associations of a lot of water and wastewater organizations. We've reached out to them. They haven't, they've reaffirmed that, they believe community water fluoridation is a good thing. We had MOA Legal take a look at it. The ruling doesn't require changes to code. We also talked to the health department, and they're here as well. But there really hasn't been any changes, official changes. The American Dental Association and all of the public health partners are continuing to advocate for it, including Public Health Service and CDC.
Great.
I'll pause there if there's questions on the fluoride before we move into the PMO.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. Thanks for the briefing. I think a lot of us saw the news article that you're mentioning. And just to note, it was a judge making a decision from the bench. And so, I'll say that. So it is a judge making a policy decision there or raising that question. And then also we can look to the south in Juneau to see there was a natural experiment done there where they turned off fluoride probably 15 years or so. And there's been multiple studies of child dental issues that increased. And so there's an interesting, sometimes you get that example in the real world where you can see the impact of a policy. My question though is, given that, again, this was a judge's ruling essentially, and the EPA, I guess, do you know if the EPA is going to engage in a process to review that, or kind of what the time frame might be? Have they put out anything at this point? Because I think that's kind of when we would want to act, and not necessarily in response to one judge's ruling in another state.
Yeah, I'll defer to municipal attorney for that.
Thank you. So this decision came out on September 24th, so it's pretty recent. And what the decision says, and it's, if anyone wants to look it up, it's Food and Water Watch Inc. versus US EPA out of the Northern District of California. And the EPA was ordered to engage in a rulemaking to look at this and, come up with maybe some new rules. That process would probably take at least a year to start to finish. And there's also a 60-day appeal period that has we're not even 30 days into that yet. So right now, we don't know what's going to happen. I would guess the EPA will appeal, but can't speak for them, of course. But right now, there's nothing that is happening.
And so the recommendation at this point is wait and see what happens with that before we take any action.
From a legal perspective, there is absolutely no legal pressure to change code right now. There's no legal pressure on code. And so if it's always a policy decision, whether you want to, what you want to do with code on this particular subject.
Thank you. Any other questions on this? I would prefer not to take it up unless we have to. That's my 2 cents. All
I
right.
do. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to get in the queue. So thanks. I think the deference to the EPA is important at some point, but also to the American Dental Association. I think we should be mindful. It's not just the EPA regulatory scheme, but medical as well. Public health. Public health and the EPA are not the same.
And to show that, we have Ms. Rash here with us at the table, just in case there were any public health questions. But I am not seeing any more on the fluoride question. Anyone else? Last call. Okay, let's move on to Program Management Office.
All right, so Program Management Office, we briefed you on this last month. We brought this in front of the Assembly at the end of September. There were a number of concerns about it. We've heard your concerns, and we're in the process of revising the Assembly documents. And essentially, there's 4 bullets under there. There were issues that were raised during both the committee meeting as well as the actual Assembly meeting. So 4 key areas: transparency of funding sources and projects, the grant funding status, where we're at on all of these grant funds that are coming in, clarification of the program management team and the scope of services, and then phasing with future Assembly action, including public hearing. And we anticipate bringing this back in front of the body on November 6th. So these are, as we briefed before, these are primarily federal grant funded projects through congressional delegated spending. And I've put in here, kind of a few bullets, and you notice on the top one there, 59 million has been awarded, and there's an asterisk on that. And I'll explain that in a couple of slides. But as you can see, there's, almost $60 million that's, essentially allocated, that's, ready for us to apply for from the federal agencies. Most of these are going through EPA. So once that money is allocated, then we have to actually apply for the grants and go through the paperwork step to do that. And then there's another 47 million under review. We've got, and then, 120 million in future requests that we're looking at. And these projects are primarily economic development and or water service extension for public health reasons. These are large projects. Would say they're not necessarily mission critical for AWW. These aren't, fixing existing pipes that are serving existing customers. These are a lot of expansion to areas like some of these communities that aren't served, and both on the water and sewer side. I know there's some like over around Sand Lake where there's potential PFAS contamination, things like that. So these are sort of standalone projects that are enhance the community, but they're not necessarily fixing treatment plants, making sure the bread and butter that AWW has to focus on every day to make sure our system is reliable and that we can provide service to our customers. And there's a few of these projects that have some interdepartmental work as well, such as the regional landfill leachate treatment facility for solid waste. And there's some work in Girdwood for the Ruani Road culvert that washed out a few years ago that we procured some funding for that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but this is essentially the status of the funding. And you'll see the ones in green, those are the ones that are essentially budgeted. They've been budgeted through the federal budget, and they're, the money's essentially parked at EPA. We have to go through the process to get that money, go through the application process, and then get it appropriated so that we can start building these projects. Going back to the scope of work, there was a few questions on that. This was a competitive process, went through a very rigorous process in Title VII to the RFP process, a very diverse local team. Now we have Jacobs Program Management as the lead consultant on it, and they have a local office here, but they have assembled a conglomerate of a very diverse team. We have some very small companies like Huddle, Alaska on there. We have PTS, which is a fairly mid-sized engineering firm here, ASRC, and quite a few others. So it's really a conglomerate of local experienced folks to deliver these grant-funded program. And then under the scope of services, you notice the asterisks that I talked about earlier. So to secure these funds, once they're allocated and they're basically approved through the federal budget, then we have to go through the process to apply for those. And some of those can be fairly extensive because most of the time it involves a National Environmental Protection Act or NEPA review. And depending on what that is, that can be a fairly large resource requirement. We also need to implement all these grant-funded projects in accordance with Inspector General audits because grant funding generally has a lot of strings attached to it. There's a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross, and if you don't do that properly, then you run into the risk of potentially not being reimbursed for the work or having the grants pulled. Another question that came up during the briefings prior was, what was actually in the scope of work? Now, this project is to implement these grant-funded program from cradle to grave. So this is, essentially they're overseeing in conjunction with our folks in our engineering division, the projects. They're, scoping them out. They're going out and getting, through the procurement process to get design services and then doing construction oversight. They're not actually digging and putting pipes in the ground. So this is a professional services contract. There is that, there's construction oversight and things in that, but I wanted to make sure there was a distinction that this does not include the actual taking excavators out and digging holes in the ground. So we're looking at, essentially phasing this, the large price tag and the lack of clarity. We've gone back and we've kind of re-leveled this. We're looking at, this initial award will be implementing essentially those projects in green on the grant funding status page. Initial award we're estimating is going to be about $7 million, and there will be future appropriations as this moves along. And as we get these grants, once we apply for them and they actually get brought to the municipality, then we have to go through assembly action to actually receive those. So there will be appropriation fund, appropriation public hearings, as well as capital budget work for both the grant funds as well as matching funds. Most of these have I think a 20% local match on them. And essentially the intent is to get this going and start getting these grant applications completed so we can get the work going. So the initial award, we've pared it down significantly, and we've kind of re-leveled this, and then we're looking at future assembly action as these grants come in. We'll be coming back for appropriation to be assembly and public input on these. And
Great,
yeah,
thank you. So I had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Persinger about this. And so what this does is it really, when those appropriations come back through, it's a great chance to get updated kind of on where we're at with these. It's just this little dance back and forth. If you could send out the October 11th memorandum and the spreadsheet to all members, I think that would be really helpful. The spreadsheet's a lot bigger then, and you can read it easier than in here. I think that would be helpful as well. Any questions on this? Okay. So this will be back before us in November, is my understanding, November 6th. While we have AWU here, I just wanted to give members an update. We have the decoupling ordinance that I promised I wouldn't delay again. Well, David will not be at the next meeting, so I'm going to ask your indulgence for one more. We discussed it, and he would like to be present when we discuss that. So I'll be moving that to November 6th as well. All right, any other questions for AWU?
thank
All
you.
right, seeing and hearing none, go, go, go. All right, welcome, Port. And in the interest of just having the port here, even though they're divided up on the agenda, let's just undertake our conversations around the port wholesale, and then we can move to any other items we have on our agenda. Does that work for you all as well? Awesome. All right, you may take it away when you are ready.
Perfect. Thanks for having us here. We'll start quickly with the port-specific proposal to purchase the sprung structure, which is before the body at the next Tuesday's meeting. Just 1 second. There we go. Okay. So I know that this, the initial part of this presentation is absolutely a review for those of you who lived through all of these steps, but I know several members of the body joined the body after some of these steps occurred, and it was helpful for me to review each of them. So I'll do a quick review of how we acquired the sprung structure, since it was a multifaceted, multi-step process, and how we understand the actual cost of that structure to be. So this was step one. This was an appropriation in 2021 of $2,800,000 toward the cost of the navigation center, which was appropriated as a grant to the community foundation. And there was a subsequent appropriation by which that $800,000 was redirected. And so at the end of the day, there was $2 million that passed as a result of this appropriation to the community foundation for the purpose of being dedicated to the navigation center. Step two from there, this image is taken from the review of Roger Hickel Contracting's expenses that was completed by the Boutte Company immediately prior to settlement to the municipality reaching settlement agreement with Roger Hickel Contracting. And this was a review completed to verify all of the different costs that RHC had incurred. This here, you'll note that they note an invoice paid. That was the $2 million that moved from the community foundation to Roger Hickel as a part of the purchase of the sprung structure. This here is the assembly approval of the settlement itself, which was for a different amount. This was for $2,455,351, which, pursuant to that review completed by Boutte, was the outstanding amount of direct costs incurred by RHC that needed to be subject to the settlement agreement. And so then how did we actually acquire the structure? This was another question that was asked to me. This is an exhibit to the actual settlement agreement with Roger Hickel Contracting, through which they transferred title to, here you see it in the box, all components of the sprung structure to the municipality. So that's how it ended up being ours. So I think we started the conversation right after the transition as our administration came into office, of what should we do with the structure. It's an expensive municipal asset. We've been paying $5,000 a month since the spring of 2023 to store it in Canada and in Utah. And we had some feedback, I know, from this body about looking for proposals from within different municipal departments and considering potential practical uses of the structure. So we issued an open call in August to all municipal departments and asked for proposals for use of the structure. We received 3, one from the port. The details are, I set out here, was to replace 3 specific structures that the port would otherwise construct as part of the Port of Alaska modernization project. The fire department proposed use of the structure for fire apparatus storage and maintenance in one of 2 locations, either at the training center campus or on the SWS property. And then APD proposed utilizing the structure to replace their Burlwood facility, which they lease, which houses the crime scene van, SWAT vehicles and equipment, and then also to house their canine unit dogs in lieu of boarding them externally. And so we had a team that met internally to review all the proposals against a matrix of criteria. That team was me as a municipal manager. It was Mr. Falsey as the chief administrative officer, Mr. Wilbur as head of community and economic development, and Shay Throop as the head of maintenance and operations, because one of the component pieces we did look at was what would be the ongoing carrying costs for the municipality of maintenance and operations of the facility, depending on what use we ended up determining or deciding we would like to put, for the structure. We looked at a series of different criteria that included the efficiencies that would be gained by the use of the structure, the importance of the proposed use, and then the proposed funding source from each agency for both the procurement of the structure, the construction of the structure, the transport of the structure, and also the ongoing operations and maintenance. And I would say philosophically, what we were really looking for across in designing those criteria was a use that would replace something we already had identified as a municipal priority. So essentially something that would create efficiencies rather than creating an additional expense for a need that had not yet been identified as something that was urgent and pressing at the municipality. So after we completed that review, the port actually came out ahead across all axes. This is an excerpt from the port's proposal for reference, and a few key pieces underlined. The port proposed use of the structure will meet the needs of what would otherwise have been 3 buildings planned to be constructed as part of the PAMP. And the port projects that this use will provide long-term savings to the overall cost of the modernization program. Also see over in item number 6, the port does have available funding that they can use right now. There's no need for us to identify additional funding to be able to pay for the structure to be transported and constructed. This is the actual proposed location at the port for the structure. And I know there were some questions about safety of the structure for this use, and the Development Services has actually looked at the structure in this new proposed location and has determined that wind loading at this site will be 77% of what it was projected to be at the original location. So their conclusion was that that may even allow us to save some additional costs in terms of the construction of the foundation for the structure. And then in kind of putting together the proposed deal, the sale of the structure to the port, we look to what is the right price? What should the port pay to purchase the structure as it's currently was paid for with general government funds? And this is again from the Boutte review of Roger Hickel invoices. This is what Roger Hickel Contracting actually paid for the structure. This $2,390,975.09. So that is what we've proposed as the purchase price for the structure by the port. So next steps, if the sale is approved by this body, then the port will take over that $5,000 per month storage of the structure components. Again, they're in West Jordan, Utah, and Aldersyde, Alberta. The port purchase will include those additional fixtures that are located in the Parks and Rec warm storage facility in Eagle River, which I know is a concern as well. And the port will examine which of those fixtures can be used productively in the structure, in the design that the port would like to use it for. And then the port will invest in the additional funds required for transportation and construction, and the purchase price payment, that $2.4 million, will go back to general government. And that concludes my presentation. So we're all here for questions.
Great. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. Oh boy, this has been a saga. So this is exciting. I do have, I'll say I support this. I think it's a good idea. And I appreciate that we were able to deal with our procedural requirements and why this didn't get voted on last meeting. But my 2 questions are one that I raised already by email. So those of us who remember last year, there was a lot of discussion about whether this structure would meet wind and snow load requirements in our building code. It is aluminum. And I know the other structure that's being replaced is steel, but also this is obviously not meant for human habitation in the way that it was proposed before. So if you could speak to whether those kind of building code inspection determination, whatever it is, has been completed. So that's the first question. Second question, separate from the structure, but what is going to happen with the site that has rebar sticking out of it over at Tudor and Elmore?
Absolutely. Mr. Rebuffo, do you want to take the first question?
Sure. We've done a preliminary look at snow loads, and forgot what the other one was.
It was wind, and those were
Yes,
things that were
yes.
raised as
And,
potential
and,
issues. Yeah.
Oddly enough, when it's not when it's not a place for people, the code requirements are a little less strict than they would otherwise be. So we're pretty comfortable that for the purposes we're intending to use it, it'll meet those criteria.
Can I ask, is it possible to get something along those lines in writing? Because this has been brought up for years with this structure, so I think it's worth putting in the record.
Yes,
yeah,
we
thank
can
you.
do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second question, I apologize, was your?
It was so Tudor and Elmore, where this
Oh, yeah,
structure
absolutely.
was going to go,
Yep.
obviously separate from this item. But we know that it's an unfinished construction site with rebar sticking out of it. So just wondering like if and when there's a timeline for that. I think it's fenced off right now, but just if there's a thought on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there was some email traffic also with some suggestions from members about what we might want to do with that site. Right now, what APD has expressed is a desire to have that site back for parking. So what we have been looking at is what is the most direct path to doing that, and then what might that cost, and then what is our funding source for making that happen, and potentially is a portion of the proceeds of this transaction something that we could use in order to make sure that APD is essentially whole and able to. They've indicated that they're having real challenges with parking because of the existing construction site. I know there was again a request from one of the members about whether or not we might consider other building structures for that site, and we absolutely could. We don't have a designated funding source to build some other type of building there right now, but we're certainly open to input and conversation.
Thanks. I'm next in the queue, and then Ms. Bronga. So the 11 to 13 million in transport and construction, do we have a identified fund source so that once we bring it up here, we can put it up?
Well, we haven't, we have to reissue an RFP or an ITB to hire a contractor so we can start what's going to be the design build process similar to what we did the last time. We can, as soon as the purchase is approved, we can start that effort.
Yes, my question is more, do we have the money in the PAMP already for
Yes.
11 to 13
I'm sorry,
million?
yes, we do.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Ms.
that's item
Bronga?
6
Oh.
here, right, Steve?
Yeah, we haven't seen this memo.
Oh, I
so
apologize. This is
new
in
to
the
us.
this is in the presentation that is
Yeah,
yes,
but we
yeah.
haven't seen the whole memo, and it's hard for us to
I
kind of
understand.
digest it in the moment. All right, Ms. Bronga, then Mr. Johnson.
This might be in the tiny writing too.
Apologies.
So, can any of the pieces, like I don't know if toilets were purchased, are there pieces that could potentially be returned after you inventory what could be used? Or the length of time we've held on to certain parts makes them unreturnable? I'm just wondering about that. And then there was talk about the Eagle River site charging the city money for their storage part. Do you have a total figure of the storage so far? And it might be in the tiny writing there, but is that just gets absorbed by the city?
Yeah, so they're both good questions. In terms of the cost of the storage, we have been paying that $5,000 since May of 2023, and that is absorbed by the city. The port will take over that cost as soon as if the purchase is approved, and they will pay it until they're able to transport the component parts of the structure. Another reason that the port's proposal was a strong contender for the structure is that they're basically ready to go as soon as possible. So they will be a shorter path to getting the component pieces of the structure out of storage. In terms of the toilets and fixtures, the port will make use of whatever, as much of that as they can. They certainly are going to use less like toilets and sinks than we might have used if this was put to use as a navigation center. My understanding is we don't have a return option at this point. Those pieces are in our possession, but we can certainly inquire about whether there's any possibility. If we aren't able to return them, then we will dispose of them through surplus.
Great, thank you. Mr. Johnston, then Mr. Constant, then Mr. Myers.
Yeah, thank you. So question for Steve. Looking at this, we have the purchase price of the 10, of course, and then I understand this is very preliminary, but $11 to $13 million to complete construction for your
Yeah.
usage. Before the sprung structure emerged as a possible solution to this problem, what was the cost estimate for the new sand storage building?
Yeah, memory serves, it was about 5.5 million.
$5.5 million.
And that's because site prep is required first. And we'll have to do that for this, for this structure as well, pour the foundation to put the structure on top of. Same rules applied for the warm storage building. So, so that set aside, if you will, is part of what we will use to cover the cost of what we'll do with the sprung structure instead.
Okay. So you're saying it was about $5 million for the initial site prep work? That's
And
relevant to both?
construction of the warm storage building, similar to to how we described what the 11 to 13 million is going to go for.
So sorry. So if we had not gone this route, are you saying that the warm storage building would have only cost $5.5 million?
Yes.
That is,
That's correct. But I think where you're going is why do we consider this a cost savings? And the reason is because it's 3 facilities that we're replacing with the 1 tent. So there was the warm storage facility that there actually was a pending assembly item where we're going to move forward, and that total is 5 million. But again, I apologize, in the small print, there are 2 other facilities, 2 other purposes that would otherwise have had to have been constructed as part of the modernization project that will be replaced by this. So that's why we consider it a savings, even though the warm storage building itself as 1/3 of that structure is only $5 million total.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So when we add up those 3 buildings that we're replacing with the sprung structure, do we have an idea what that would have cost?
Do you, Steve?
It probably would have cost all in about 15 or 16 million.
So
And that would be the cost of construction of new facilities. But where a big part of the savings has to be appreciated is in the fact that we have a very small footprint down there at the port, and we need to free up as much square footage ground space as possible for transit yards. And quite a bit of transit yard could be lost if we had to build those buildings because there's no property left to put it on. So being able to consolidate, some of what would have been PAMP new building construction, by freeing up buildings that now exist for use as a PAMP structure saves the cost of the building constructions for PAMP and doesn't tie up any extra square footage for new buildings that could otherwise be used for transit yard space for commerce, which is pretty darn important too, because we just can't create as much new land as we would otherwise need.
okay, so just to make sure I'm following this correctly, really we're talking about a small cost saving in the big picture of things, but it's more about efficiency and the use of the space. That's the real upside.
That and the construction savings and the time savings that would go along with that as well.
And to Chair Member Johnson, you're right. It isn't a massive cost savings. That said, as from where I started, it is something where we actually have a funding source available and where we were intending to spend this amount of money anyway in order to do something that we've identified as a municipal priority. Whereas frankly, the other 2 proposals we received were something that would require a substantial additional investment of municipal capital for something that had not been identified specifically as a next priority item. So we were trying to look for that alignment. You are absolutely correct. It's not an enormous amount of cost savings. It is some cost savings, and it is something we had already, a use that we'd already identified as something we needed to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. I don't know that I would suggest a couple $1 million is small savings. I mean, it's kind of a big chunk of money. But all of those factors together certainly weigh towards this. Steve Rebuffo, please plug your ears. Becky, is there any reason why we're just charging the exact amount and not some margin?
Because that's the documented price of what the structure is worth. So we in looking at the structure for the deal, we're just looking to charge the port a fair price for what the actual structure costs. And we have that very clearly documented in the history of the purchase. And so that was what we agreed was a fair cost plus the carrying costs of storage and et cetera going forward.
Okay, I think that's fair and reasonable. I just had to make sure I asked that question.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Myers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to go back to something Member Bronga said, mentioning cost of storage and being paid to Eagle River Parks and Rec. To my knowledge, that is not happening. Can the municipal manager maybe comment on that or correct that?
Through the Chair, Member Myers, that's correct. There is currently no cost being paid, no fee being paid for the use of that storage.
And do we have a timeline on when it will be finally vacated so they can go back to working on vehicles in there?
Mr. Buffo, do you want to speak about that when you guys think you're going to have those items out?
Well, it sounds like that's an as soon as possible kind of request. So when we begin to get our act together with respect to planning for this, we'll provide that answer. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know what to say. We have no space to store it on the port. The one place it would go is going to see the wrecking ball here in a couple of weeks. So we'll have to figure out a plan for that.
Apologies if I might.
Okay.
Your intent, the port's intent is to begin construction on this next summer, correct?
That is
So to the
correct.
extent that helps, that's the
Yes, that
plan
is
for
correct.
commencing construction of the sprung structure.
So I guess it'd be safe to report back to the board of directors for the park supervisor, or they're going to have that, you won't be able to use that space all winter again?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, last call on the sprung structure before we shift gears. All right, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the PAMP update.
All right. We have two different component pieces. Anybody wanting to angle to go first? Today, we're going to talk, we'd like to talk a bit about, there are two items on the upcoming agenda that concern a proposal for revenue bonding for the port and also for corresponding increase. You want to go to that first? Okay, corresponding increase in the port surcharge. So I think I'll turn to Mr. Falsey first to talk about that. And then we have another item regarding the designer of record. So we'll do that afterwards.
I just wanted to ask while you're setting up, since we were babying that because we didn't want the warranty to go away, so that's why we were using Eagle River Parks and Rec for storage, I would really like to request we find another place so they can have that space back. Maybe we don't have to be as fussy now.
It's a good question. I don't have an immediate answer to that, but I'm happy to look into whether there's anywhere else we can put those items.
If I might, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I know we're moving on, but I would also suggest maybe having somebody look at expediting the liquidation of all of that material. I don't think that has to wait till the construction. Some of it might be there because it's part of the construction and it's part of appurtenances, but probably a good chunk of it is like, we know we're not going to use. So it could be, there is a purchaser out there that'd be interested in it and move it along. Just a thought.
Thanks. You know what? I'm going to make a note that we'll have a little update come back in December. That'll give them some time to see if they can answer these questions.
That's fair. We're happy to see if we can dispose of some toilets more quickly. If the sale is approved, then we'll say the port can go in and take a look.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Update on two items that are being introduced at the October 22nd Assembly meeting. This is a very short presentation, 2 slides, probably 5 minutes, just to begin the conversation. The two items that are related to the port that I'm bringing to your attention today are an item that would allow us to issue $250 million of port revenue bonds so that we would begin to actually have cash in hand to start the construction for Terminal 1, and the associated Port of Alaska modernization surcharge adjustment to support $250 million of revenue bonding. You will note that the $250 million is a not to exceed amount. And that to go all the way to $250 million would require a surcharge larger than what we previewed for you in August. Both of these are public hearing items, so there will be no action on October 22nd. There could be action on November 6th, and we are trying to drive towards adoption before the end of the calendar year so that we can adjust the PAMP surcharge by January 1st. I will show that the punchline, the thing that I think is going to get the most attention, is this last page of the newly proposed tariff 10.1, which would show what the PAMP surcharge would have to be to support $250 million of revenue bond issuance. For today, I want to say a few things. First, $250 million shows up for a few reasons. One, because we got some signal from our financial advisors that going to the market in a smaller number of chunks might be more beneficial to the municipality rather than going every year annually for just the next calendar year's needs. But there is not a fixed reason why it must be $250 million. Two, whenever you do a tax-exempt revenue bond issuance under something called the TEFRA, an old 1982 federal act, you have to do a public hearing. And so just to give us some capacity, Alden Thurn, our chief fiscal officer, held a TEFRA hearing at $250 million. So this is the outer bound of what we could do this go round. And three, because we know that by the time this is all over, we will almost certainly need to issue this amount of revenue bonds, at least, unless there is some manna from heaven, either Juneau or from Washington, D.C. or somewhere else, that rains down upon us. But we are just starting the bidding here, and we have already reached out to the Port of Alaska user group and said, hey, this is coming. Here is the punchline. This is the thing that you are going to be acutely interested. Let's have some meetings. Let's sit down and talk about this. I will preview for you that a couple of the things that immediately came back were, one, when we talked to you in August, the original idea was that we might be able to structure a debt service schedule so there's only one payment in the next calendar year, and then two payments in every years after that. And so the Port of Alaska surcharge would ramp up. There would be sort of a half implementation in the first year and then a full implementation in the second year. That is not in the schedule you have before you, but it could be. And if that ends up being more commercially reasonable and doable for us, it's something we'd certainly be willing to entertain. Second, I'll say the users have fed back that ramp up is of interest to them and that there was some commercial expectation created by our initial August conversation. So we're going to work through all of that. We do want this to work for everyone. We want to make sure the project is successful. We also want to make sure the commercial relationships are still viable. So all of that is to say, we have promised to come to you early and often and to play all the cards as face up as we know how to play them. That's what we're doing here today. We'll have more opportunities to discuss this before we actually act on it. That's the current status.
Thanks. So more opportunities we'll have to schedule because we're not scheduled for those opportunities and we won't have this committee again. We do have a meeting, a special meeting, just want to flag it for everyone on the 29th to really talk about all the moving pieces of the port as well. And that will be in advance of the November 6th time. So I have a couple of requests. Can we get this schedule at the 150, 200, 225, and 250? Like, can we see what the surcharge would be at kind of each of those levels so we can just get a sense of like, my math is not good enough to incrementally adjust this. That would be really appreciated. And then could we get a little bit more information about what the half and half ramp up looks like? Because we haven't delved really deeply into that concept versus just a singular payment. And then the last request is, although we may authorize the sale of revenue bonds or to issue the revenue bonds at an amount not to exceed amount, you will make a judgment call because it's a not to exceed of what you actually need to issue. Is the idea that the surcharge only kicks in like on January 1 of each year, or could it kick in some other time, right, in the calendar year? We haven't really talked about the mechanics of that.
To the chair, yes. On the first question, we absolutely can provide you with all those choose your own adventure scenarios, and we're interested in that as well. I already have one where at this level, it could phase in over the first year and ramp up to the second year. By way of preview, it's pretty much what you would expect. It's a little bit more than half of those figures for the first year, and then it ends up very slightly higher because you did the phasing. So it ends at 1099 rather than 1097. But we'll get you all of those charts so that we can all make this decision together. To your second question, can we make this decision in real time? In theory, we can. We could say we want to issue this amount of revenue bonds on this day, or we want to, I'm not sure we could even issue them in multiple tranches because we do incur fees and there's a whole market placement that goes with that. But to your second point, we definitely could have the PAMP surcharge change in the middle of a calendar year as often as we'd like. I think we have heard from the tenants that is difficult for them because they kind of have to pass these fees through. And to the extent we can pick a January 1st change and tell them as soon as possible, that is much better for them. And so we're hearing that and trying to accommodate it. And that is, I think, why we are trying to drive towards a pretty firm conclusion on what we want to do one and done before the calendar year ends.
Got it. So the follow-up question I have to that is if we say, we're planning for 250, it's a not to exceed, we set the surcharge at the higher rate, and then we find we didn't issue 250, we can make that adjustment then in the next year to kind of equalize?
For certain.
I'm just wanting to kind of think through the various component parts. Mr. Constant.
So this is germane, but it might be sidebar. So, Madam Chair, you can kind of put this to the side if it's coming up. But Bill, I had heard some concerns from users that the scale of the increase was like an order of magnitude of 3 or 4 times what they had been told it was going to be. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, that's right. So through the chair to member Constant, when we came to you in August, we showed you a scenario for $150 million of revenue bonds, which we thought at the time would get us through calendar year 2025. 250 would get us through a little bit of 2026 as well. So the principal amount of borrowing that this PAMP surcharge that's on the board and in your presentation today is bigger because it's for $250 million of revenue bonds rather than 150. And it also doesn't have the ramp up. This would show the complete change in a single year. And so a consequence of that is, yes, I think in the previous presentation there was a scenario that said something on the order, and I forget the numbers, of $3 a ton for cargo next year, then $6 and change the following year. This one is at 11, so it is different, and we want to work through that conversation.
All right. Well, thanks. That definitely has my attention.
Okay. Maybe the municipal manager can, or Mr. Falsey can speak to kind of what's the intersection between the fact that we're headed back out for RFP and this issuing these revenue bonds now when we don't have, the contractor's price in.
Yeah.
Sure, I can take an initial crack at that, which is actually the part of the reason that we're feeling that we need to move toward this is because one of the concerns identified by the qualified bidders who did not end up bidding on the T1 construction contract was feeling a lack of certainty about a plan of finance and that the municipality had cash in hand to actually be able to support the progress under the contract. And so we are seeking this authorization as part of an overall calculus around being able to put that out and be successful in getting competing bids and driving the best possible price for the municipality. And this is one step we can take in that direction.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on revenue bonds? As Mr. Falsey indicated, this is going to be introduced on Tuesday night, set for public hearing on the 6th. I will work with the chair to find an opportunity, hopefully for a work session, so that we can kind of get and go through some of those additional pieces of information. All right, let's keep going. Oh, go ahead,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Falsey.
before I turn the mic over to Eric, one item that is not on the slides, but what I want to introduce you again, bringing to you stuff early as often, as soon as we know it, because we are driving towards a real TIFIA loan application. I believe the Assembly is aware that in order to do a TIFIA loan, you must pay the Build America Bureau's legal costs and financial advisor costs. We will also incur costs to apply for a TIFIA loan from our own financial advisors and from our bond counsel. All in, the cost is about $1.3 million that we will need to have in hand to go forward. We are looking to put that on the agenda for November 6th. So we'll have hopefully more time to talk about that as well. But I didn't want the Assembly to be caught flat-footed or surprised if and when that shows up.
Great, that prompted a question from Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, so that would be basically a fee to apply, and if we're not successful, then it's not something we get back, is that right? Or if we are successful, it's not something we get back.
Yes, to Member Brawley, it's not exactly a fee to apply. It's really like we are paying for the cost of the advisors that the Bureau must retain. But no, we wouldn't get it back were we not to be successful.
If I might, Madam Chair, may I speak to one other thing too? In the list of, before we move on to Mr. Adams, in the list of other items that are coming, we did squeak one last item onto the addendum that I want to flag for the members as well. This was something that was identified by the user group, that there was an approval from the Design Advisory Board in June of the terminal design, the T1, T2 design, that was per code supposed to go to the Assembly within 60 days for approval. That went to the mayor on June 14th and never proceeded to this body. And so we have placed an item in the queue for consideration by the body of approval coupled with a waiver of the 60-day review timeline, because at this point, that body that approved it has been changed and reconstituted by a subsequent ordinance. And so that's proposed for consideration. It languished in the transition between administrations and was not kicked out in June on a timely basis. So that will also be in the queue for introduction on Tuesday as an ordinance, because it involves a code waiver for consideration by the body.
Great. And I just ask members to take a read of that T2 item for introduction. And if you think we need a work session on it or to convene a special committee meeting or something like that, let us know, because right now it would be set for public hearing on the 6th. Okay, please go ahead.
With that, we can finally turn it to Eric. Do you want to take, do you want to? Yeah, I'll just scoot over.
Sorry, it just reaches. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Adams, Jacobs Program Manager for the Port of Alaska Modernization Program. Quick brief update and then an ask for a requested increase in change order authority for the designer of record. I'll kind of walk through what that looks like. NES 1 updates to date, just since that's a key project. All the sheet pile has been removed, marking a huge project accomplishment. We thought those were going to come out and be really challenging to pull out, but they went smoothly after we started, after about the 6-week delay there. Armor rock placement designed to protect the shoreline began this week and anticipated to complete next year, along with the final dredging. And based on having to go into next summer season, we have updated the federal permits and modified and got all approvals to finish out the NAS 1 construction next year. So if you haven't had a chance to go down there, it is a huge difference from visually seeing it. So I'm sure Steve and the port would be more than happy to walk anybody through that. So next on the agenda for request for additional change order authority to the GHD WSP contract. Design services for terminal replacement project, asking for an increase of $717,753. And there's the key details there. I'll walk you through the current amount that we spent on change orders to ask this increase back again. So just get to the next page. Change order. So through the course of the Terminal 1 design, we went change order 1. We had to do some cone penetration testing, which shows some gaps in the data between the test pile program that we did back in 2017. So we had to change the contract by $97,000. Stevedore operations building decrease of $254,000. Those buildings were designed to be on the dock. We found better uses for those dock areas. So we decreased the contract so they didn't have to design that. Then also the permits require us to do Terminal 1 maintenance dredging during the T1 operations, meaning that we have to dredge the Terminal 1 dock area, approximately a 45-degree angle out. So we had to increase the contract for them to modify the drawings for $98,000. And then we had a geophysical survey increase of $35,000. If you guys are familiar with the admin building, we had a number of items that we ran into during design of that and had to come back to you guys. That was all on the ground. And so we requested a geophysical survey at the end of each trestle on those items to make sure we can identify anything that could be stuck in the ground to try and limit that risk during construction. So we had to increase the contract by $35,000. Then one of the key things here is you've heard us talk about a alternate fueling area and making sure that looking at Terminal 1, the whole program right now has a new petroleum terminal on it after T1 and T2 is built. But as we're developing the T1, the item was brought forward as like, hey, there's a huge potential savings of right now. I think that petroleum terminal is about 225 million. It's on the PAMP budget. But what if we looked at the Terminal 1 and if it could house an alternate fueling facility? So we had to increase the design of record contract by $361,000 to address that. And then we had change order 6, which was bidding support during the RFP that we released, and also change order 7, which is a shoreline infill seismic mitigation design, which is about $198,000. And that's the design between the two trestles. Basically, during a design event, you lose about 250 feet of the fill that we placed in. And so we looked at protecting that area. So those are the change orders we've issued to date to the designer of record. After the execution of change order 7, we have $357,000 remaining. As I mentioned, I am requesting an increase back to the original change order authority amount to give us $1 million to address any changes that come up based on the rebid scenario. And these funds would be transferred from the 2023 State of Alaska grant there. You can see $25 million. So the additional work we're going to be looking at is to support the rebidding process for Terminal 1. The Assembly is aware we received no bids. This effort includes investigating and evaluating ideas for additional work that can be phased and started in construction 2025, which would not impact the entire project, right? Because the original project timeline was we'd start July 7th, 2025. So we have some ideas there. Also assist with the preparation update of design documents for issuing with the RFP.
review, analyze, and implement design changes requested by the Port of Alaska, and review and responding to bidder questions during the procurement process. The estimated cost for these services are not expected to exceed the restoration amount, and we won't, when I say that, we'll get proposals from the designer of record, issue the change orders appropriately, and walk through. We're looking at a number of scenarios to start construction next year on the PAMP, Terminal 1, and will be their support they'll be providing us to make sure we look through those, like potentially stevedore buildings or electrical substation, or a number of items that we're walking through with administration on those. So just to sum it up, his initial base contract amount with all the change orders, where we're at to date, and then the bottom one is the original change order authority, and then reestablishing it back to $1 million. So that is my request, and it will be on the assembly agenda, I believe, November 6th. That hasn't made it through the system yet.
Great. So we're just about out of time. A question to municipal representation. Are we comfortable, right, when we start seeing change orders and we're replenishing change order authority, are we comfortable within the cost we were expecting to see flow through for these projects?
Just to make sure, are we comfortable with the increase in the amount of change orders that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, or is this unexpected, right? We know big projects have change orders and that's why we have change order authority, but are we feeling comfortable with kind of just how it's going? Because there was a number of change orders and this is like the second round of them, I believe.
Yeah, if we received bids on the T1, we would not be back here asking for this.
Yeah, if I might through the chair, that was what I would say as well. Part of the motivation for this is because we are seeking to try and figure out, could we design something out of this and do it and do some limited amount of construction in 2025? Are there things we need to change in order to alter the risk profile to entice bidders? So it's necessitated by our work to try and make the rebid process successful.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate the momentum keeping moving forward. Any other questions on the PAMP? Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. We had another item on here for stormwater utility update. We didn't get to it. I know there's a lot of interest though in having that conversation, and perhaps we can even wrap that conversation somewhat into the budget process. Because the question is, are we going to move forward with anything? And if so, will it take money? And then on the legislative priorities, I would just ask that all utilities make sure if you have legislative priorities that you're going to the legislative committee and you're chatting with them. Ms. Brawley is the chair of that. And that's the state legislative program. And of course, I believe Mr. Clauda will be heading it up for the administration. And budget items for 2024 on October 25th, we will be having our budget work session on enterprise utilities and the capital projects. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add? No. Oh.
We can mention it. We have one other additional item that's in the queue for the assembly that we thought we, in the interest of fulsome disclosure, would note. It's an increase in, you want to talk about it? Yeah. Legal fees.
Yeah, I sent documents to the legal department, Eva and municipal attorney Eva and Ben Bowman. The save for change order amount will be coming forward to you guys, I believe, on the November 6th agenda. So they didn't make the 22nd to increase their support. And really that's to help identify the risk allocation in the contract and divvy that up and walk through those items. So that will be coming forward.
Great. Kind of a rolling total, I think, is what's going to end up being requested, just so we can kind of see where all of those things go. Before you go, Mr. Rebuffo, we're going to extend by 5 minutes, and that's that. And I'm going to make sure we get to audience participation. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so Becky and Bill, you heard the chair just suggest seeking information regarding the stormwater utility. In 10 seconds or less, or 15 seconds or less, can you give us a brief position of the administration on that conversation? I want to get on the record. Where are we going?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. And honestly, at this point, I have only a very brief update, which is the direction from the mayor is for us to pick it back up, look at it, continue to assess what we need to do to move forward. And it's really a staffing capacity question right now. We're working in the next few weeks to identify who's going to own that and make sure that we have staffing capacity dedicated to it so we can make some material progress.
So then to Meg's point, if that staff needs a budget, now's the time to think it through. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Rebuffo.
Yeah, just real quickly, this morning, the port maintenance personnel took the floats out at the Ship Creek Small Boat Launch, and we buttoned it up for the season. So in a short amount of time, once we get our financial act together, I will give you a little presentation on how much it cost us to operate the facility this year and what we're looking at in preparation for reopening again next season.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for the update. And if you have any data on utilization, that would probably be really great to know
Yeah,
when you give us that update.
That's part of what we're going to
Awesome.
try and pull together for you.
Anyone want to participate? Anyone in the audience? Anyone at all? Okay, with that, we will adjourn. Thank you so much.